Well, hello everybody, it's Gary again from Lantana Removal Queensland. Thanks for coming along for this little journey. I'm going to give you a little bit of a look at Rush Creek here. So this is on the road from Petrie through to Dayborough, and it's quite an interesting thing. Now the drone wouldn't take off on the guardrail there because it has too much metal interference, so it wouldn't respond to the controls, so that's why I've taken it off there. But just a little bit of interesting information for you. So most people don't realise when you look at Lantana along a surface like this on the roadway, how it completely blanks out and is such a closed weaved net of material. So nothing gets across these areas, and in fact when you actually have a very good look at this later on in the higher footage, you can see that there's no thoroughfares through this material, like any wildlife that would be traversing an area will leave a track, and it just doesn't exist in this materials. And that's everywhere that the Lantana and the other materials exist. So the wildlife is greatly restricted in its habitat of utilizing these materials, these trees, these watercourses, and it also has a very detrimental effect on their crossing points, where when they do cross a road they're choked into a certain area and they come blasting out of the underbrush with no warning and get skittled. Now when you look at these trees here and look at these infestations, a lot of this material is about 30 to 40 foot deep, and that's one of the things. Aerial footage is very useful, but some parts it doesn't give you a really good visual understanding of exactly how tall this material is and how impenetrable it is. But you can see with these trees, where the material has swallowed them up, they can't, nothing can utilize those assets, and access to the water is next to impossible in a lot of these areas. But more to the point, this material can never be allowed to control watercourses like this. This actually goes on for about 10 kilometres further downstream in exactly the same way, that all the way up that corner, as far as you can see at that roadway coming in from on the left hand side, is Lantana, and all the way that roadway that you can see perimeter straight up ahead of us up there, that white line, that's complete Lantana back down to this creek on this side here. And it actually continues into the block above on the other side of the road with equal infestation. But when you see how far this material travels on these watercourses and how it's a complete understory blanket, nothing gets into these areas. There's no big thoroughfares where animals are moving through it, and it just creates such a complete ecosystem wipeout. And the biodiversity of a natural ecosystem in a riparian area, this is catastrophic. And our councils and governments and Southeast Queensland Water have allowed this to happen illegally. They're not allowed to release this material to the environment. In fact, the head of the Queensland Biosecurity said, I would actually have to prove that they knowingly release this material to the environment. These are the experts in the field, and that's the head and supposedly expert of biosecurity. The person that's under the minister says, I would have to prove that they know this is a bad thing. And yet when you actually read the actual legal, what's the name of the biosecurity? Look at the flowers on these plants here. All in bloom, all releasing into the environment here when the seeds drop and get washed downstream. So the zone of influence that these materials have in further propagating downstream is just catastrophic for our environment and for our wildlife. And yet the head, the person that's underneath the minister, that actually advises the minister, says you would have to prove that they know this is a bad thing. Like, I mean, that's an incredible... Look at that drop off there, and look at the Lantana at 40 feet above that drop off. As a complete sheet on the left hand side there, and on the right hand side here, as I pan back, this surface just continues for kilometre after kilometre downstream down the Southeast Queensland Waters corridor. So where does it change from council obligation to South East Queensland Water? Well, I can't tell you that, because none of them will actually answer those questions. All across that roadway surface there, straight up above, is just a wall of it. And that Lantana there is around 40 feet deep. Okay, it's very hard to judge those things. This is about 30 feet high. If you were standing on that roadway there, that's an old roadway that used to go under this bridge. So it's a complete blanket there, propagating downstream, and they know it's propagating downstream. They know this. They know that see where this material takes up a position close to the headwaters of a tributary like this, it gets fed water from a lot of sources upstream of those areas. That's a higher shot of that exact same area, and it shows you just how widespread that is across those surfaces. But when you look at these trees and you see that the tree is just a solitary stick sticking up through this material, nothing can climb these trees. And this material now is starting to climb these trees. Within the next 2 years, it will kill these trees. See the gum trees in the left, you can see the different colour, different shape, a little more grey. You have a look at the bases of these trees. There is nothing around those trees. There's no access to utilise any of those resources. And the World Wildlife Fund want to tell you that the land clearing is absolutely devastating. And yet we lose about 4 million hectares more land every year, not because of something, not because of land clearing. 4 million hectares per year. Look at the stems on these trees and the ones that it's already killed. There is nothing can climb or get access to those trees. And eventually this material will climb those trees and it will kill them off. This is absolute devastation of our habitat. You look at how the borderline of this material, where this material stops, because it starts to create its own ecosystem. It attracts much more dew because it has a high leaf area, and it self-propagates itself. So when you look out further, as I lift up in different parts of this video, you'll notice how the landscape changes. And when it gets to a more open landscape, okay, they see there. So the kept areas and the more open landscape is much drier compared to the way this material starts to create its own natural micro climate, micro ecosystem, and the way that it then draws all the resources away from the native forestry and the native species. But this type of thing then forces animals to rush across the road with no cover, and they get knocked much more prevalently. And you have to look at a lot of this material that you see that the animals are just given up on these areas. They don't even go into them anymore. See, along this embankment, you can see where at one stage they poisoned that front section of this embankment, and you can just see a few tufts of green there. But that's how that poisons then ran down this watercourse here and has poisoned the ground surface there to create that track. It's not a track of wildlife, it's actually from the poisons that were put on this embankment along this area. But they stopped at this point at the end of the guardrail, roughly. So it's just absolutely, see to the right there, you can see how sparsely. And the only thing that really comes back when they poison like that is the weeds. But this lantana in front of me is about 25-30 feet high. So the drones are fantastic from some points of view, but unless you know what you're looking at, they don't give you, a complete understanding of how tall and how deep and how impenetrable those materials are. And here we are a little bit further along the road. These infestations are so large, and the council gives up on them. They're on both sides of the road, as they are all along the whole of the Moreton Bay Regional infestations. Look at the dead trees in amongst all this stuff where it's killed them off already, and it's starting to kill off and work on the other ones. And this just goes up all the way up this hillside. And from here it gets fed a lot of water, catchment water, off that property to the right, and that's why this is so healthy here. But then when you actually look at what you're seeing, okay, all the infestations on both sides of the road there, and then down through this lower section as it pours off this road. Look at those weed trees, weeds there, are 40 feet to 60 feet tall. And the lantana on this other side of the road, it's about 30 feet deep, killed all these trees off and working on the others, and is completely impenetrable. There are no animal paths across this material and nothing lives underneath it. But its expansion rate at 3,600 plants per plant, living in an area like this where it has this catchment off these roads, is absolutely catastrophic. These materials can never be allowed to control these types of surfaces. The devastation downstream of these materials is just horrific. And this is all the way down into the watercourse at North Pine Dam and all through those areas. Look at the growth on this. Because I'm flying a little bit faster, it's hard to see the amount of flowers. This is just completely in bloom, and this is at the very, very beginning, right? We're just coming off the dry part of the season in winter, and it's only just starting to bloom, but it's already in bloom and strongly in bloom. Look at all the flowers there. So it'll start seeding very, very soon. Now the drone's out of battery here, so this is why I'm hurrying at this point in time, and I'm trying to get back to myself in a hurry. So that's why it's a bit sketchy, the flying, and I'm sorry about that. But I'm just trying to show you there's a huge infestation there, and then that infestation on that side of the road is catastrophic because it's on the low side as it spills through there. So these property owners are never ending, stopping, battling, trying to keep these materials off their properties. And it's completely illegal. They cannot legally release this material to the environment, and yet the biosecurity head says that you'd have to prove that the council knows this is just not acceptable. It's not legal. It's illegal. It's been illegal for 30 years. And yet they have been doing it for this whole time. All of those weeds trees there. Anyway, look, thank you very much for stopping by, and I'll catch you on the next one, and hopefully we'll be able to show you much more footage that makes sense. Please give us questions and share the heck out of it, because until we get the government to actually take this material seriously, we are going to be continually losing land at 4 million hectares a year. You know, that far outweighs any land clearing problems, and it devastates the fauna. Anyway, I'm Gary from Lantana Removal Queensland, 0449 986 880, and we operate out of Narangba in Queensland. And thank you very much for taking the time to watch this, because without you guys, we wouldn't be able to get any information out there at all. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you on the next one.